Hello, my name is Kristen Bolden, and I'd like to welcome you to the other side of history. Now, in this talk, we're going to look into the history of King James I of England, and also look into the question as to whether he was a homosexual or not. Now, Queen Elizabeth I of England left her throne to her cousin, James. He was the great-great-grandson of King Henry VIII of England, and also the son of Mary, Queen of Scotland. After James's mother was forced to abdicate, James, only 13 months old, took the Scottish throne. His father, Lord Darnley, was murdered when James was only 8 months old. James's father was a Protestant, but his mother, Mary, Queen of Scots, was Catholic. James had been raised as a Protestant and was a Protestant monarch, like his cousin, Queen Elizabeth I, had been. Now, King James I, he sponsored the translation of the authorized King James Version of the Bible. It is a Protestant translation of the Bible into English, and it was named after him. Now, King James I, he ruled England, Ireland, and Scotland for 22 years, and his reign in Scotland was the longest of any Scottish monarch. So that's 57 years and 246 days. His death was in 1625. Many Catholics in England, they hoped that with James taking the throne of England after Queen Elizabeth I, that he would be sympathetic to the religion of his mother. However, their hopes were disappointed, and instead, King James I put in place anti-Catholic legislation, and he showed no tolerance towards Catholicism. This, of course, caused the Roman Catholics to be against him. And he did break their power. Some in Scotland were also resentful that Scotland was under the dominance of England. There is a ridiculous allegation that King James I was a homosexual. There is an excellent YouTube video that has been done by the King James Bible Research that is titled The Real Story of King James. And it is definitely worth watching this video. And I would like to just give you some of the information that is from it for you. Now, the truth is that if King James I was a homosexual, there is absolutely no proof, but rather much proof to the contrary. None of King James's contemporaries ever said that King James was a homosexual. Instead, they said that his conduct was everything that could be expected of a good Christian. His life was virtuous and upright. Here is what some of King James's contemporaries, and some of these were in opposition to King James, this is what they said about his morality. Edward Coke was in a major constitutional conflict with King James over the extent of royal power versus the supremacy of common law. He was also against homosexuality and called it a detestable sin against the order of nature and the Creator. However, while Edward Coke was a critic of the king, he never claimed that King James was a homosexual. Instead, he commented that he was impressed by King James I, and he talked about his sterling moral example. Now, Arthur Wilson lived through King James I's reign, and he was a playwright and a historian. And he opposed King James, but said that his moral life was decidedly pure. Bishop Godfrey Goodman was the chaplain to Queen Anne, the wife of King James I. And this bishop, he had leanings towards Roman Catholicism, and this made for him enemies in or at Windsor. So he showed opposition to King James I, but he admitted that James, he was a very chaste man. Miles Smith, he contributed to the translation and the production of the King James Version of the Bible. He had no problem in speaking against members of the royal family for moral transgressions, and he had done so in the past. But he honored King James I for his morality. The Puritans, they had a strained relationship with King James I due to his insistence on religious conformity. Yet the Puritans, they never questioned King James I's moral character. King James's son, Charles, became the next king, King Charles I, and he was not moral like his father. The Puritans, they thundered against King Charles I and his immorality, but they never once spoke against King James I's morality. The Puritans called King Charles a Herod and saw themselves as John the Baptist. But the Puritans, they actually only had praise for King James I's morality. The Presbyterians, they spoke against immorality. They were in conflict with James's mother because of her adultery. But the Presbyterians, they esteemed King James I for his moral example. Now, Isaac D. Azzarelli was a 19th century historian who explored the character, court life, and the literary and political aspects of King James I. And he concluded that there was no sovereign that has suffered more by the old proverb of killing a man by lies. Those today who try to make out King James I to be a homosexual use some cultural differences between King James's time and ours. It was normal in England in King James I's time for men to kiss each other on the cheek. Erasmus told of the English, speaking of the English, he said, "When you came to England, you were greeted with kisses. When you left, you were again dismissed with kisses. When you were visited, you were kissed, and when it was time to leave, there were again kisses. Whenever you would meet, there were kisses in abundance. Wherever you moved, there was nothing but kisses." So maybe the English especially took to heart the passage where the Apostle Paul says to greet the brethren with a holy kiss. In times past, and during King James I's time, affectionate terms such as darling and sweetheart were used by men to other men. Like the kiss on the cheek, this did not make them homosexual. King James I, he survived 4 assassination attempts. Kings at that time had giant beds where bodyguards would sleep with them on either side. Now, King James did sleep with bodyguards in his bed, but so did the other kings of his time. King Henry VIII, he had 4 bodyguards that slept in bed with him every night, and nobody has ever accused King Henry VIII of being a homosexual. King James, he wrote a book that was titled in English, The Royal Gift, or The King's Gift. It was written for Prince Henry. Now, that was James's eldest son. And it was to be as a guide to kingship. In this book, it gives his duties to God, the state, and his people. However, Prince Henry, he died of typhoid fever at the age of 18, and over a decade before his father's death. And so it was his younger brother Charles that became king after King James I died. Now, in this instruction book to his son, King James, he told his son to not pardon 4 things. The first was witchcraft. The second was murder. The third was incest. And the fourth was homosexuality. Homosexuality was a crime against nature in English law. King James constantly spoke of the responsibility of the king to be a moral example to the people. James talked to his son about how many civil wars in Europe had been started by the illegitimate sons of kings, and that if they had just been moral, they could have saved the lives of many of their people. He called adultery a filthy act and told his son to remember the solemn vow that he had made to God and to his wife. King James I said that a king must be a virgin when he married because he owed his body to his future wife. He told his son to keep his body clean and unpolluted as he gave it to his wife to whom it only belonged. He said that he had no right to be joined to a virgin if his own body was polluted. Why should the one half be clean and the other defiled? He said. King James truly loved his wife. He wrote many love letters and poems to his wife, Anne. He said, "I thank God that I carry that love and respect to you, that by the law of nature and God, I should give you as my wife and mother of my children." End quote. He then said that even though he had married her because she was a princess, if she was a king or a cook's daughter, it would not make a difference in the love that he had for her. Anne was the daughter of Frederick II, King of Denmark. King James I and his wife Anne, they had 8 children. She always lived in the palace with her husband, and King James I, he had no mistresses. John Reynolds was a Puritan preacher and a scholar from the time of King James. He once told King James that he did not approve of the official vow that was used in the English wedding ceremony. It said, "With my body I be worshipped," end quote. Now, Reynolds did not like the term worship being used because he said worship only belonged to God. King James, he told Reynolds that his problem was that he was unmarried, but if he had a good wife, that he would feel and understand that all of the honor and worship that was due her should be bestowed upon her. Those who attack King James I today, they also attack the King James Version of the Bible. The King James Version is very clear on the subject of homosexuality. Much more clear than the modern Bibles that the higher critics promote. King James I was the first monarch to sponsor and encourage the distribution of the Word of God in the language of the people. Never before had the Bible received the full force of the government behind it. It was King James I who made the reading of the Bible open, common, public, and legal. King James I was himself a scholar. He was fluent in Greek, French, and Latin. He was well read, and even as a teenager, he was thought of as a serious scholar. He was kept in relative isolation until he was 14 years old, and all of his tutors were devout evangelical Protestants. It was actually not King James that gave the name the Authorized King James Version Bible. The people, tired of being persecuted for reading the Bible, they named it that name. What sheriff would persecute them for having a Bible that was from the king? Just as Mary, the mother of Jesus Christ, was chosen because of her upright character, I believe that God chose King James I to give us the King James Version of the Bible. The King James Version Bible is a Protestant Bible, and pure manuscripts were used to produce it. King James wanted to do what was right. He wrote against witchcraft and demonology. He even understood the dangers of smoking, and he spoke against it. King James said that a smoker and a non-smoker could not be equally free in the same room, end quote. Now, a good example of King James making the effort to do what is right is shown in a story that I would like to share with you. Now, once King James I, he got very angry with his servant, and he even kicked him. The king was at a conference and had asked his servant for papers that he was sure that he had given to him. The servant said that he had not been given any such papers. That's when King James I lost his temper with his servant. However, when King James got back to the palace, he found the papers still on his desk. King James, he called all who had been there when he had made his angry outburst, and he seated them again around the conference table. He then brought in his servant, and he knelt down before him and asked for his forgiveness. King James wanted to do the right thing. There is no evidence that we have of any reason to question King James I's moral character. I hope that you have enjoyed this little talk, and again, I just want to encourage you to go and listen to the video where I took this research from, and I am so grateful for those that have done this research. And it's up to you to decide what you want to believe, whether King James I was a homosexual or not. I certainly believe there is no truth to that slander. So I want to thank each one of you for listening, and I'm wishing you God's blessings.